Hello guys, this is Dama.K2. This is a guide here for these three platforms, and each one of them has a collection of my craft from the campaign. At first I was considering doing them all at once, and then I came to the realization that maybe your guys' computers might not be as good as mine. So yeah, so I'm just doing this video so I can just give you guys a brief overview of which one of these is. Right here, this one is a very fast interceptor. It is the Ace of Spades light interceptor. It was extremely fast. Had some help from Vikings Mark Ii with it, and I have it set up with radar guided missiles with turning thrusters to give it a lot of agility. And I managed to get a little bit more speed out of this, and he also did some interesting things with these turrets that are mounted on the front of the aircraft here. So, yeah. Anyway, moving on. Next we have the Vikings Mark II. It is a Pac Tank Destroyer. Very mean piece of work here. If you guys watched my series of From the Depths, Ashes of the Empire, you have probably seen this thing in action. Not really a whole hell of a lot to it, but I have seen it tear some shit apart at a pretty decent range. It's very expensive to run, and I had to give it a lot of engine capacity for it to work the way I needed it to. So yeah, probably not a very good early game vehicle. That and the price tag's kinda high. But anyway, let's move on. This is the Crazy Train Mark II. Cost isn't nearly as bad as the last one. It can move extremely fast. It has a custom jet engine built into the back here. And I did a lot of spin block and mimic work to try to get these pistons on either side of the train to look and behave correctly. But as you can see, if I wouldn't have told you, you probably wouldn't even noticed. So, yeah, moving on. We got over here the biggest tank destroyer that I have made for this series. And it is the Hand of Doom Super Heavy Self-Propelled gun. Again, it is not a cheap tank by any stretch of the imagination. And it fires one of the biggest, or actually the biggest APS shell that I have for this campaign. I'd done a bit of experimenting, just trying to find one that seemed to work well for me, and honestly I just went for like something with sheer block damage. This is the shell that it works with. I've also used Hesh in it and a couple other things, but yeah, feel free to play around with it, try to find a shell that really fits your needs. Was quite a bit of work trying to get the volume count down. I tried to make this to where it'd be feasible to use in the campaign. Yeah, very inefficient engines, but again, I was wanting to try to make it to where you guys could use it without having to take a lot of space in this, because it is fairly compact. Another very compact design over here is the Creeping Death Pac Hover Tank. The packs in this thing are a bit lighter than the Tank Destroyer over there, but this thing also has a buttload of frontal armor, and these packs do a fair bit of damage, and they can do it at quite a distance. Basically, it's just going to sit and orbit its targets and just pummel the shit out of it with Pac. But it is going to be very expensive to run because there is a lot of boilers, and this engine isn't exactly the most material efficient thing I've ever made. That it uses custom jet engines to provide a little extra power as far as thrust and for energy storage. just something I want to note real quick. If you do plan on using this thing, spawn it in as a land vehicle, because if you spawn it in the air, it's just going to belly flop. So yes, spawn it on the ground, let it lift off on its own. Okay, so next here we have my light tank, the Wehrmacht light tank. Did very, very well in the early part of the campaign. Very well armored. Not a whole lot to it. Just got a APS in here that was designed to be very, very rapid firing, but probably not pack a whole lot of punch. But it did good in the early game against the Dustwind Gypsies, so overall I was pretty proud of it. Has some autocannons here for some light AA action. Yeah, pretty good early tank. This one over here I've shown you guys is the Metal Machine. Originally it was designed to be a 400mm belt blaster for the Ashes of the Campaign for me and Heitzmeister. We haven't gotten around to using it just yet, so I went and repurposed this as basically just a long-range minigun tank that just saturates an area with fragmentation shells. Again, very, very compact and very, very expensive, but it's a lot of fun to use, and watching this thing's insane rate of fire makes it worth it. And it reloads surprisingly quick, but I spammed the shit out of the ammo intakes on this to try to get it that way. So yeah, very, very well armored, and it's got some shield projectors here up front. It's very, very tanky. Definitely take quite a few hits. So continuing on, we have over here the Copter Mark II. Fairly cheap, works a very good early campaign, even did pretty good against the Onyx Watch as I recall. Been very happy with the design. It has a bunch of small fragmentation missiles. This configuration's using in a radar setup. There are missile laser designators that you can use should you choose to switch these over. I believe the smaller ones use fragmentation, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, EMP frag. And these are just large HE missiles here on the sides that are radar guided. Yeah, very, very good helicopter. I enjoyed using this a lot. Next, we have this airplane here. It is the Death Harmonic fighter bomber, meant to be very, very cheap. Does fairly good in the ground attack role, though it's probably going to be vulnerable to missiles and light APS. And one of the issues that I was having with this in the campaign is with the variations in terrain all over the place. This thing tended to belly flop into the ground every now and then. So yeah, something to be aware of if you want to use it. So moving on, we have the first dedicated transport vehicle that I made for this campaign. It is the Jawbreaker transport helicopter. It moves at over 100 meters per second and has enough room to store 2 large cargo containers. It is custom jet engine powered to get the most speed out of it that I could, and is pretty efficient as far as material transport goes. Very, very cheap. Makes for a very, very good early game transport. And next over here we have the Sparta light fighter, which is actually a custom jet engine fighter. Sorry, I need to change over here. The Deadly Blades on the front are pretty much just for show, and it really gets its power from these custom jet engines and does about 100 meters a second, so fairly quick. Not as quick as the Ace of Spades light interceptor down there, but early game it's actually very, very good. The 30 mil autocannons probably aren't all that great, but the missiles seem like they were performing pretty well. And it does fairly decently into the air-to-ground roll. Very, very cheap, and it's a fairly practical early game unit, especially if you want some early game air support. So let's move on to the next platform. We'll start from here. This is the Symphony of Destruction Missile Artillery Tank. Basically, I have it set up to where it uses the regular land AI, and it's pretty much just gonna kind of orbit the battlefield and just launch these big ass remote guided what are these? I think I have them set up to be heat missiles. Yes, shape charge. I put radar buoys on these so that way they can essentially have their own detection systems and don't have to rely too heavily on the detection systems that are currently on the tank. Little trick that I picked up from Razul. And next over here is a custom jet engine powered heavy bomber that I made for this campaign. The Dream Destroyer heavy bomber. Has some very, very powerful explosive bombs here. You guys got to see it bomb the ever-living shit out of the, what was it, the Steel Empire. It's very, very quick. Does about, I think it was 183 meters per second. Very fast. Has some deployers for dealing with missiles and for custom jet engines because I love redundancy. But early to mid game, this thing will probably do you a whole lot of good, but the price tag is kind of hefty. So probably more mid game bomber, and as long as you keep it away from like railguns and lasers, PACs, things like that, it'll probably do pretty well. So next we have a missile artillery tank here. The Tyrant Large Missile Artillery. Extremely expensive. I think this is probably the second most expensive unit out of my entire campaign. And it has one of the skimpiest armor schemes that I've ever used on any craft in here. It is not designed for direct frontline fighting, and it basically the AI is set up to where it's just going to kind of orbit the battlefield and launch these big ass large missiles. It could probably be refitted to launch like one huge missile out of the top here, or just shitloads and shitloads of the medium-sized missiles, but it wouldn't take too much effort. I was pretty happy with it. It was very good at dealing knockout blows. And over here, probably one of the best tanks that I've had is the Runa Imperia heavy tank. Price tag ain't too bad, and it has some of the best armor that I have put into a tank. We have lots of shield projectors down here in the hull of the tank, and we also have one up here in the turret. Something I should warn you guys is the turret is prone to popping off. It probably doesn't help matters that the turret itself is only the only, I'm trying to think how to word this. Everything below the top part of the turret, the gun housing, is not armored, and sometimes the turret has a nasty habit of popping off. But I think I've only seen that with very, very high explosive weapons, possibly from missiles or crams. Beyond that, I think it done pretty well. It also has all these casemate guns for backup. I was attempting to kind of give it a Baneblade look, and I think I accomplished that with this design. So next over here, we have the Guten Nacht Laser Spag. There was an issue that I was having in this campaign, and that was I wasn't quite under the volume limit. So trying to get it down, I went and removed a few things. Actually, I still probably need to remove some things, but yeah. Anyway, that's something you guys could probably handle on your own. But I just wanted to give you a look at the insides here. The laser performed very well, and I was just popping planes left and right, and was still able to punch through armor pretty well afterwards. I also had it equipped with these missiles here. Depending on what I'm fighting against, I've been switching these out from infrared to, what is it? Radar guided. It did pretty well, even as just something to do damage to enemy vehicles. The laser really helped out a lot. So now moving on to the medium tank that was in my campaign. This is the Thunderstorm medium tank. Has a pretty big gun. I went with 400mm 3-meter, I think. Has an okayish rate of fire. The armor on it is very good. It will take a lot of damage. Sometimes the turret will get popped. That's something that's really hard to avoid in small designs like this. I did my best to try to armor it as best I could, but probably would have redone the engine, made it breathe a little bit better had I went and redid this. But yeah, it's essentially the same tank that I uploaded to the Steam Workshop for you guys to play around with, other than maybe the paint job and a few other optimizations here and there. I think I did really good with the details on the back with these mufflers. I think it looks pretty badass. Anyway, moving on, we have the 99 Ways to Die Cram Bomber. I actually built this during a stream. Sadly, it wasn't used in the campaign, though I did do a short showcase on it in like the second to the last episode of the campaign. I figured you guys would still want to play with it. I'm probably going to use the early game in a upcoming Onyx Watch campaign that I am planning on doing here fairly soon. It probably might need some more optimization, but it's pretty quick. The cram cannon is pretty potent, so you guys can see here. And it's very, very cheap for what it does. It does have some missile decoys down here that launch out of the bottom. So yeah, that's the 99 Ways to Die Cram Bomber. Here we have Vikings Mark II. I'm kind of on the fence about this guy. It did not perform nearly as well as the previous one. I think that's more of a product of the APS nerf that... Well, let me just show you guys how much of the aircraft the APS in this actually takes up. Pretty much everything that isn't engine is APS. The fire rate is kind of meh. that was pretty cool watching it making its attack runs. If you do plan on using this, I might recommend upping the armor just a little bit more, or only use it early up to maybe mid game. It's the price on it isn't too awful bad, so it could probably be used fairly well early game. It does have some decoy deployers here in the back, so it's reasonably decent at dodging missiles. I keep flip-flopping back and forth on what kind of shell I want to have for these. This is essentially what it fires, like a armor-piercing frag and armor-piercing AotE. Yeah. Just to try to see if I can maximize damage and still give it a lot of versatility. You could probably rip this all out, or rip these shell customizers out of here and maybe go with like Hesh instead. I just didn't seem like I was having a whole lot of luck with it. Anyway, now let's move on to the craft up here. This is the Last Stand Self-Propelled Tank Destroyer. Does very, very well. It's fairly cheap. I have seen this thing kill bisons. I have also seen them kill the, the scarabs in one shot if it manages to get a shell past the shielding on the scarabs. This thing will just utterly gut it. And it uses one of my favorite shells. Actually, building this design actually helped me define one of my favorite shells so far in modern, or the most current version of FTD. And it's just like a pure 4m by 400mm Hesh. I've been using slight variations depending on what I need, but this is actually a very, very potent shell with pretty decent velocity. Usually in from the depths, I've been going for a velocity of about maybe 400 meters, usually 4 APS, so yeah. You guys can do whatever you want with the information. Alright, so this here is the Metallizer Self-Propelled Cram. Basically just a massive artillery piece. You guys got to see it do some pretty crazy things in the campaign. The Crimkin itself fires somewhat slowly, but when it lands a shot, it's going to do a hell of a lot of explosive damage, as you can see down there. Basically, just meant to spam HE. That's its purpose in life. I did a lot of mimic work here on the back to try to make it look like they had like a whole loading mechanism here for the big cram shells. I think it came out pretty good. Alright, so moving on. We have something that is probably going to be serving me in a lot of other Let's Plays. When I get around to doing some more campaigns in From the Depths. This guy right here is the Led Zeppelin. It moves extremely fast, and it's got just tons and tons and tons of storage room. I can't quite remember off the top of my head. Yeah, it's almost like 400,000. You could probably do a little optimization, try to see if you can squeeze some more in there, but overall I was pretty happy with it, and it's cheap as hell. The engines are extremely efficient. And I have actually put these on my engine platform that I uploaded here recently. Figured you guys could probably get a little bit of use out of it. Not designed for direct combat, just to move shit around as fast as it can and as much as it can. One of the biggest problems that I had with this is basically the volume more than anything, oddly enough. But yeah, if you want to move a lot of materials in a hurry, this thing is definitely a good way to go. I should also note that this was actually inspired by one of Dell's gaming videos where he was building a Zeppelin himself, except it was more for an offensive use, and this is more transport. And I like this a lot because it'll pretty much outrun, like, probably 75% of the stuff out there. And I think that's it for this platform, so let's move on to the last one here. Now this guy, I loved building this thing. Basically, it's designed to look and function much like a B-17. And it is the Firestorm Heavy Bomber. Now this thing is particularly interesting because it uses custom jet engines for flight. The Daddy Blaze on here, they're pretty much just for show, to be completely frank with you guys. I also have some extra engines in here because this thing just needed more and more engine power, and it seemed like a very good way to go about doing it. It moves pretty fast, about 100 meters a second. I believe it... No, it doesn't look like it has a flare launcher on it. Okay, I must be thinking of the Spooky then. It's somewhat tough. The aircraft itself is made pretty much solely out of metal. And there are tons and tons and tons of these APN radar guided frag bombs that just blanket the sky whenever this thing comes overhead. And these bits right here, these are just mimics on spin blocks that open and close. This, other than that, it doesn't really serve a purpose other than to make it look like a actual bomb bay. I had a hell of a time trying to get all these autocannons into position where it most accurately seemed like a B-17. The only ones that I was not able to do were the left and right guns up here in the nose of the plane. I was able to get the one on the chin and the top turret, but yeah, getting the ones down here, that just wasn't going to happen. But yeah, this thing does wonders early game, and it just decimates so many early craft. It's glorious to watch. Price tag on it's a little high, but I think for what it does early game, it's worth it. And it took a lot of work just to try to hide these custom jet engines in this thing. I think it turned out very well though. Alright, so let's move on to the next. This bit right here is actually intended to work with this tank chassis over here. If you watch my video on how to do tanks with dock turrets, it'll show you how to set that back up. Otherwise, I didn't have any idea or any other way of doing this without just like separately uploading the tank itself. So yeah, that's the reason why it was done this way. It should be really easy to connect the two though. But I wanted to mention that this has some variations on it that you guys didn't see when I was building it. These are actually using 200mm 2-meter shells instead of the 4-meter by 400mm shells. So yeah, the rate of fire on these actually made this thing a lot more dangerous, and it was killing bisons faster with these guns than it was with the 4 by 400mm, oddly enough. Anyway, next over here we have the Spooky Gunship. This was inspired by a very similar looking and functioning aircraft that was used in Vietnam to lay down suppressing fire on the Vietnamese, or I'm sorry, not the Vietnamese, but the Viet Cong. I guess everyone was over there getting shot at. It was probably, well, yeah. Anyway, I'm digressing. But this thing has a very similar setup to the Firestorm. as far as the engine configuration. However, this is using basically a, how should I word this? A modified version of Iron Mark III's jackhammer Gatling guns that he uses for CWIS purposes. But this thing just spams the ever-living crap out of timed, inertially fused HE shells. I'll give you guys a glimpse at the shell here. And it spits them out at an extremely high rate, and it's just glorious to watch. If you guys want to see it in action, you could probably watch, I think I used it in the second video of the series, maybe the third as well. But yeah, I've been really happy with it. It's pretty cool to watch. But those are pretty much the only weapon systems that this thing is carrying. It does have some decoy deployers back here, just in case if some missiles get shot at it. It's basically designed to orbit the battle and just spray the hell out of everything with these miniguns. I was able to get a pretty decent rate of fire out of them. At least I think it's decent. And lastly, probably one of the most important vehicles of the whole campaign, and this is something that I've actually been using all the way from back when I was doing Quest for Neater. And this is the 7734 spy satellite. This thing was actually pretty decent at revealing what was going on in enemy territory, and it's so damn cheap I just spammed it everywhere. I was using it to capture the territory, and yeah, it's probably going to be around for quite some time. I have a very similar version of this up on the Steam Workshop. The only main difference is this one is using wooden metal beams and the other one is using trusses, so yeah. So that is the entire collection of my craft from my Ashes of the Empire campaign. So just wanted to put this video out here so you guys could get a brief rundown of what everything is. I'll be releasing these on the workshop very soon, so you guys can download and play with them as you see fit. So with all that said, I'd like to thank you all for watching. This has been Dama 2. Y'all have yourselves a hell of a day, and keep your hammer high. Later.